The content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised.
Oh, how I wonder what it's like to relax. See the sky down under. Hope my plans collapse. Oh, how I'm under the surface of my tears, falling down asunder the meaning of my years.
This is True Crime XS.
In the last episode, we were talking about these rabbit holes that you can go down if you're like looking for one thing and you don't really find it, but you find something else. And I guess as I get older, my ADHD becomes more research focused, and I will literally sit down to do like a 30-minute thing. And then I realized like 5 hours have passed, and not only did I not do that thing, I did like 5 other things that I really never thought of. You do that?
Dude, I walk in the kitchen to get a drink, and I do 15 things, and then I leave the kitchen without a drink.
Yeah.
So absolutely, I do that all the time. The interesting part about this was it was such a brief mention in the other case, right?
Yeah. He's mentioned in kind of a rule out way, and I don't know how you rule this guy out of anything. He is, by definition, we're talking about a serial killer today.
Right. And one interesting point, I think it's this guy. He came up as one of the victims was somebody that Henry Lee Lucas confessed to.
Correct. Yes,
yeah,
he comes up in so in the Carolinas, North Carolina, South Carolina, there are 9 murders that Henry Lee Lucas has confessed to over the years that they, for the most part, have all been debunked, but this one is clearly debunked much later. It does get a mention. I think you can find, if I'm recalling correctly, like a cold case files on this episode where they talk to some of the family of the victims and stuff. For me, one of the things that was really bizarre about this guy is I've clearly stated on the show that like I'm interested in people who kill couples, but equally to that, I am interested in killers who have accomplices. And it's kind of rare that you have a serial killer with a true accomplice. I don't know that this counts, but he certainly involves other people in his crimes.
Right. It's interesting. I feel like it backs my theory up more because up to a certain point, there's accomplices, but the murders are really done by him.
Yeah. I looked everybody up that is like kind of listed as an accomplice here. It looks like 2 of them have now passed away kind of recently, actually. One I can't tell because he has a charge like in 2023 when he's 64 years old. And it's a trafficking charge, but it doesn't do what I normally think of when I look at trafficking charges. So I can't help but think maybe it was something that got stuck on some entrapment. But the guy that we're talking about today, his name is Terry Alvin Hyatt. He's born March 28th, 1957. He lives the majority of his life in Asheville, North Carolina. He is the second to the youngest of 5 kids. By all accounts in the courts, his family is completely normal. It is believed that Terry Hyatt has some kind of learning disability that never really gets diagnosed appropriately. So he does not get an appropriate education per se. He has trouble connecting with his peers on a social level and an emotional level. He's described very early in life as behaving unusually, but people, even the ones who come to court and talk about him, describe him as relatively friendly and helpful, if a little slow. But family, friends, neighbors, all of them They describe him as sort of a backyard mechanic, and they say that he learned at one point how to buy and sell used cars. He's also known as a criminal pretty early in life. He's born in 57, but by November of 1975, he's getting sentences that indicate he's had a lot of contact with law enforcement. He ends up getting a 4-year prison sentence for larceny. He had stolen a woman's purse, and he had been on probation and parole for another incident where they gave him like what is the old version of like a split sentence. He did a little bit of active time, but he had some active time looming. And shortly after he's sentenced to this 4-year prison sentence, he escapes. He escapes from a North Carolina prison, but he ends up being recaptured only a day later. So where he comes in for us is we had talked about a double homicide that kind of happens in the same like vicinity as where Terry Hyatt, quote unquote, operated. And he's definitely a violent felon. He is a person who is listed as being checked out for that double homicide that we covered. Probably by the time you're hearing this is in the last episode, so it's the episode previous to this. I wanted to talk about him though because I noticed something in several different documents, and that is he's one of those killers that has a victim count with a little plus beside it. And I'm always interested. One, I'm just generally interested in the plus marks of the world. Like, why don't we know more about that? Two, I'm interested to know what you think about that in this particular case. And we can kind of get there as we talk about him. So the first known victim for this guy, Terry Hyatt, is going to be in 1979. On April 15th, 1979, Hyatt's going to be 22 years old. A 40-year-old woman named Harriet Delaney Simmons, who's a mother of 7 and a night manager at a restaurant in Raleigh, North Carolina, called Johnny's Supper Club. She's going to leave Raleigh. She's going to head out in her blue Toyota. She's hoping to go and visit her boyfriend in Nashville, Tennessee. But she never shows up. Her son-in-law, a guy named Ronald, he goes out looking for her. He follows the same route that he believes she would have traveled. And he finds her car at a rest stop off of Interstate 40 near Statesville, North Carolina. Most of her belongings are in this car, but missing are the car keys and her purse. He starts to worry. She had promised that she would let her kids know if anything had happened. The police in that area, and I don't know if you're familiar with, like, this area would be Iredell County. It's kind of small. So you got the local police. They go out trying to look for her, but they have to get, like, the county level folks, so the Iredell County Sheriff's Office, the Statesville Police Department, they have to bring in the SBI because they can't find Harriet Simmons. And we're not going to know anything about her case until almost a year later. On March 23rd of 1980, a man is walking through a national forest called Pisgah National Forest, and he finds what appear to be the skeletal remains of a body in a wooded section that are not far from Candler, North Carolina. So to give you some geographical references here, Candler, North Carolina is going to be about 110 miles from this rest stop where her car was found. That's kind of a hike. That's a couple hours of a drive, and it's mountain roads or interstate roads, depending on how you travel. Preliminary examinations of these bones determine that they're probably female, but because of deterioration, they cannot establish her age, race, or cause of death. The remains are sent down to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, to the North Carolina Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. And a guy named Dr. Larry Tate is going to perform an autopsy on the bones. He deduces in his report that the victim had likely been killed by 4 stabs to the left side of her chest. And just to throw this out there, I noticed this in some of the articles. They name different places that you could find her, information about her being missing. One of those is from newspapers.com. It's an old Raleigh News and Observer. And while she works in Raleigh, they call her Missing Franklin Woman. So from a place near Raleigh. They have a little article there that pops up March 27th, 1980. So this is going to be the day before Terry Hyatt's birthday, which I thought that was kind of interesting. A skeleton found in rugged Pisgah National Forest near Asheville on Sunday is now believed to be that of Harriet Delaney Simmons of Franklin County, who had been missing for almost a year. A spokesman for the state chief medical examiner's office in Chapel Hill said the skeleton of a Caucasian woman could be that of 42-year-old Simmons. Dental records that would confirm the identity have been difficult to obtain, and a positive identification may take several days. Dr. Larry Tate, who is the assistant state chief medical examiner, said the woman had been stabbed at least 4 times in the left chest. Authorities are going to treat the case as a homicide, but spokesmen for the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office and the SBI declined to say whether a suspect has been identified. Mrs. Simmons, the mother of 7, had been missing since leaving Johnny's Supper Club in Raleigh, where she worked on April the 14th, for an Easter Sunday trip to visit a friend in Nashville, Tennessee. And this is the boyfriend we were referencing. Her navy blue 1978 Toyota was found April the 20th on the exit ramp of an Interstate 40 rest stop near Statesville in Iredell County. Police had treated the case as a routine missing person incident because they had no evidence of foul play. Mrs. Simmons' keys and pocketbook were missing from the unlocked car, but her clothes, a thermos of coffee, and a thermos of milk were found inside. The skeleton was found Sunday by a person walking through a wooded area about 150 yards off of North Carolina 151 in the massive national park near Candler. Larry Tate said it appeared that the skeleton had been at the site some 100 miles from where Mrs. Simmons' car was found for at least 6 months. Buncombe County investigator Earl DeWeese said car keys and jewelry found nearby had been identified as belonging to Mrs. Simmons. 2 packs of cigarettes also were found, but the pocketbook was not. Family and friends have said they were baffled by the disappearance of Mrs. Simmons, who was divorced. Soon after she was reported missing, friends bought a newspaper advertisement featuring a picture of Mrs. Simmons and asked for information on her whereabouts. Her daughter said in a telephone interview Wednesday night that she was confident that authorities are doing all they can to solve this mystery. All of them have been very thorough, and they have all been very considerate. They have been in constant contact with us, and I appreciate their concern. I've been satisfied with their work. So this is going to go unsolved for a long period of time. But with the recovery of the body, they're able to work through the identification process. And Dr. Paige Hudson releases a statement to the press. She's from a different division of the medical examiner's office, and she claims that the decedent has been tentatively identified as Simmons because of those keys and other things found at the scene. Authorities began to investigate this case differently. They start to look at a possible link to something called the Old Time Fiddlers Convention, which would have been in Union Grove Township. So it was close to where her car was found, but it's not close to the place that her body is found. They point out in newspaper articles that there are visitors that come in from all over the country, and her disappearance occurred on the final day of the Old Time Fiddlers Convention in 1979. In 1984, authorities think they get a break in the case when Henry Lee Lucas admits that he killed her. And this was along with 9 other murders that he had allegedly committed in North Carolina and South Carolina. But like everything else, over time, this is proven to have been impossible. And the way that it's impossible here is the timeline lines up where he's clearly somewhere else. There's a pretty good article from the Charlotte Observer from August 19th of 1984 that talks about the 10 crimes that are allegedly Lucas's in North Carolina. Have you ever, in South Carolina, have you ever heard some of these kind of listicles that he gave out to people?
Yeah.
So in this one, I thought it'd be interesting. So we've talked a lot about Henry Lucas. I thought it would be interesting to point out that Tex O'Neill covers this, and he talks about how this might be linked. According to this article, it says Harriet Simmons was a cautious woman. She was a person who had recognized her vulnerability when the Franklin County woman had once driven home on a flat tire rather than stop on the road. So this guy's talking to her family about it. When Simmons left her job as the manager of a Raleigh supper club, it would have been at 1:30 a.m. on Easter of 1979. She was headed for Nashville, and she packed up her car so she wouldn't have to stop along the way. And she told her family she'd call them when she got to Nashville, but she didn't ever call. 5 days later, her car was found at this rest area. And I'm bringing this up because this has an important detail that isn't listed anywhere else that I've seen. One of her tires is flat. The night that she vanished, a gap-toothed drifter named Henry Lee Lucas was crisscrossing the country in a casual quest for victims. So this is what they thought of Lucas back in 1984. Lucas has told police he killed as many as 360 persons all over the country, acknowledged picking up a motorist on I-40 about the time Simmons disappeared. He says he raped and knifed his victim, whose name he didn't know, and he dumped her body in Tennessee. Simmons is one of the at least 10 persons Lucas is suspected of having killed in the Carolinas during what was described by Lucas's own words as a 5-year, 35-state odyssey of violence from 1976 to 1981. Some of the names that are on this list are an 8-year-old girl that Henry Lucas says he snatched in 1978 near Perryville, Maryland. He says he dumped her in Four Oaks, which was 35 miles south of Raleigh. So he's describing going from Maryland down to Raleigh, North Carolina. Her name is unknown, and her body has never been found. Lou Della Jernigan, 54, was shot in the face in October 1979 when she answered the door at her home near Four Oaks. 2 female hitchhikers, one was picked up in Durham, the other near Winston-Salem. Their names are also unknown. Eva DeBrule, a 15-year-old who disappeared in June of 1977 from York County, South Carolina. Linda Cope, 32, of Lexington, South Carolina, whose dismembered body was found at a Georgetown County landfill in June of 1981. Lynn Pittman, who was 21, whose body was found in July of 1981 in the Savannah River near Hardyville, South Carolina. And an unidentified couple found shot to death along I-95 in Sumter County, South Carolina, in August of 1976. So Lucas talks a lot about different crimes that allegedly have happened in the Carolinas. But what we know now is that Henry Lucas lied about pretty much everything he ever said.
Right. He was talking about crimes that were in files that were put in front of him.
Right. We have what is Harriet Simmons' now unsolved murder was a missing persons case tied to Henry Lee Lucas. It is refuted, and the way that it's refuted is going to come up here in a second. The second victim, though, is in August of 1979. So Harriet Simmons is in April of 1979, right around Easter. This victim is a 21-year-old who is a young mother of one child who works at a Dunkin' Donuts in Asheville, North Carolina. So now we're back in Buncombe County. So Iredell County is to the east of Buncombe County. We've moved into the mountains of North Carolina. She's supposed to meet a friend at a bowling alley on August 25th, and she goes missing. Her name is Betty Sue McConnell. After failing to return home on time, her mother and her older sister, they contact the police, and the police immediately start looking for Betty Sue. 3 hours later, Betty Sue is found off a bank of the French Broad River near Alexander. She's been stabbed multiple times in the chest. An ambulance is called and attempts to save her life are made, but she dies from her wounds en route to the hospital. 2 hours later, her car is found partially submerged about 5 miles away from where Betty Sue McConnell had been discovered. So we have someone who almost survives, and I find those to be so interesting when someone is like right on the verge of like being a witness as opposed to a deceased victim. And we've got one more case here. So we're going to fast forward from, actually, we got two cases. We'll talk about both of them. Moving forward in time a little bit to October 19th, 1979, Terry Hyatt is driving around Asheville when he spots a 40-year-old woman who's walking home from work at Krispy Kreme. Dunkin' Donuts, Krispy Kreme. He pulls his truck up beside her and under the threat of a knife tells her to get inside the truck. According to this woman's story, he drives around aimlessly for a long period of time. He robs her of $44 and he is constantly threatening to cut her throat. But eventually, he releases this woman after she convinces him and talks to him saying she doesn't like the police and she's not going to contact them. Shortly after she's let go, the woman walks into the police station. She describes her abductor. She describes his vehicle. They track him down and they arrest him. Now, they're going to end up finding him guilty of this crime, and they're going to sentence him to 25 years in prison for armed robbery and kidnapping. Okay. Does that all make sense so far, what we're doing here?
Yeah.
All right. So with this sentence, the Buncombe County sentence here. So his prison sentence for this attempted kidnapping and robbery, he goes in shortly after the incident on October 19th, 1979. He's arrested. He's held. January 24th, 1980, he is convicted, and he gets released on January 5th of 1990 from his parole. So he doesn't end up becoming a suspect in this other case until later. But if you dig into his sentencing record, what you will find is he was actually released to a halfway house along the way. And that's how we get to our last victim that is known here. On July 9th, 1987, 19-year-old Jerry Jones is a cashier working at a Harris Teeter in Dorita. Dorita is a neighborhood outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. She gets reported missing after her boyfriend goes to see her at the store. 24 hours later, the local police find her body in a wooded section of the same neighborhood. She's naked and her throat had been slit. Police Captain Larry Snyder said that an unknown assailant might have kidnapped her from a parking lot on Graham Street. In response to this murder, Harris Teeter, who is Jerry Jones' employer, they offer up a $10,000 reward for any information provided to authorities relating to her murder. Crime Stoppers also releases a $1,000 reward. A few days later, police in Charlotte, North Carolina announced that Jones' murder might be connected to the recent rape of a 24-year-old woman. In both cases, witnesses reported seeing a white male driving a white pickup truck approach these women. And in the Charlotte rape, the woman said that her assailant drove her to an isolated area of Mount Holly Huntersville Road where she was raped. Following this announcement, police are overwhelmed briefly with various tips about both cases. However, despite their efforts, her murder becomes a cold case. So that's Jerry Jones's murder. It goes unconnected to anything else for several more years. The cold case squad of the Charlotte, North Carolina Police Department, when they're interviewed about old cases in 1994, so 7 years after this murder. They expressed that they hope in the future that this is one of the cases that will be solved using advanced DNA technology. So we're gonna see this be a cold case for some long period of time here. But in 1998, we're finally going to get an arrest in several of these cases. And we're going to get it in perhaps the dumbest way possible.
Yeah, it's interesting, definitely.
So in November of 1998, a man named Jerry Leon Harmon, who is absolutely drunk out of his mind, stumbles into the sheriff's office and claims that he has been racked with guilt over something terrible that he did. He tells the officers that come out to talk to him that he had been accompanying a man when they rammed Betty McConnell's car off the road on the night of her death. The story he tells is that the driver of the vehicle said that they were going to steal money from Betty McConnell in order to buy drugs and buy alcohol. But that's not what happened. So this is the Dunkin' Donuts employee who went missing. She was found like wounded on a bank of the French Broad River near Alexander, North Carolina. She had been stabbed in the chest. An ambulance is called. She dies on the way to the hospital, and they find her car submerged in water about 5 miles away from where she was found injured. And this guy has information on that. He says that the driver drags Betty McConnell off into the woods, and when he returns, his clothes are bloody, and he says that he killed the girl. And he says the driver's name is Terry Alvin Hyatt. The police are a little dubious of what this very drunk man is telling them. We're going to rely on a little section of a document called Hyatt versus Brinker. It's from 2009. This is an appellate court document where once you exhaust all your state appeals, you try to move into the United States, like the Federal Court of Appeals. In this instance, the document is coming out of the Fourth Circuit. It has a paragraph in here where it describes a slightly different timeline, but we're going to use this for what we're talking about. It says on August 13th, 1998, while intoxicated, Jerry Harmon visited the sheriff's department in Buncombe County, North Carolina. He provided officers with information relating to the murder of Betty Sue McConnell, which had occurred 2 decades earlier in August of 1979. Harmon stated that he and a man named Terry Hyatt abducted Miss McConnell and that Hyatt then raped and murdered her. Harmon also suggested that a man named Lester Dean Helms might have additional information about Terry Hyatt. In October of 1998, law enforcement officers interview Lester Helms. He tells them that Terry Hyatt had kidnapped and murdered another woman named Harriet Delaney Simmons in April of 1979. I don't always advocate for the use of what I would call jailhouse snitches. But when they are describing firsthand knowledge kind of against their own interests, so
they're incriminating themselves to an extent, yeah.
Yeah, they're incorporating this crime into their life story. When they do that, a lot of times you will find that they are probably relatively truthful. The account from Lester Dean Helms when he admits to participating in Harriet Simmons' murder is that they came across her at the rest stop where her car had broken down. We now know, or believe we know, that to be the car had a flat tire. And I think I read somewhere on the internet that it said they offered her a ride to get car parts, but I think what they really did was they offered to go and get her a tire that they could help her put on her car. But instead of doing that, they drive her into the mountains and each of them rape her. So this is Lester Helms and Terry Hyatt, saying they both raped her. He says they both raped her.
I don't think he does say they both did.
What do you mean?
I think he said Hyatt did.
I am going by a couple different things here. The Asheville Citizen-Times has an article from January 28, 2000. According to this article, the story that is told on the stand is that they both had sex with her, which would be rape. Do you think that's... I've seen it differently too, by the way. So
I'm just
know
going from the opinion where it says that Helms and Hyatt encountered Miss Simmons at a rest stop where she was having car trouble. Miss Simmons entered their van after they offered to help. Helms and Hyatt then drove to a secluded wooded area, and Hyatt raped Miss Simmons in the back of the van.
Yes, I've read that as well. Yeah.
That's all I know. Yeah, but whatever.
I was going to give both versions, so okay, you're right there with me. After this sexual assault occurs, in one version of the story, Hyatt drags Simmons off into the woods, and he comes back without her. He has blood on his hands. Terry Hyatt attempts to prevent this from being admitted as evidence into court. Justice named James Downs overrules this being suppressed. He reasons that after the arrest, the defendant had voluntarily waived his rights and he had not requested an attorney. So they try and exclude Helms's confession from implicating Hyatt, if that makes sense. He gets arrested November 19th, 1998. He's arrested for both murders at this point.
I just want to clear up. I want to be clear because Helms makes the statement after after the police talk to him, but Hyatt gives enough of a response when they go to talk to him at the behest of the two guys that he was with, supposedly. Like, he incriminates himself to some extent. They're not going completely off of what the two guys told him.
Right. And some time has passed. We get this confession in August. It's now November. So they did a little bit of investigating at the very least, right?
Well, I presume so. I mean, because my initial thought, whenever you've got the jailhouse snitch or accomplice confession, but downplaying of their own role, right? I always wonder to what extent. I always wonder about like how accurate it is, and it would be very, I will just say it this way. It would be very convenient for somebody to talk about their own crimes and pin it on somebody else in a way that is convincing.
I do believe that. And for Helms's part, when he testifies in court, he says that he and Terry Hyatt had gone to the beach that day and they were driving home on 40. They come upon this woman when they go to the rest stop. Her car appeared to have been broken down. And he said that Terry Hyatt tricks her into getting into their van. And they say, hey, we're going to take you. We're going to get some car parts. They drive out into the mountains. He doesn't specifically say a flat tire, but the car had a flat tire. So that's what I'm assuming. They drive out into the mountains. And Helms says that he believes the threat of killing her, because he says that Hyatt had a knife out the whole time. And that in his description, he kind of minimizes this, and this sounds terrible the way I'm going to say it, but he says that Simmons had sex with Hyatt out of fear and then performed a sex act on him, and he believed that was also out of fear. So that's in his testimony, and I don't think that is unreliable testimony. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's not. It makes sense. So one point of interest I think here is the idea that if they were at the beach that day and they encounter her in Statesville, that's a good 4.5 hours?
Yeah, it's
of a drive.
Depending on which beach you're at, it's a minimum 4 hours. Yeah,
right. And so I find that really interesting. But anyway, and then to go on, I would assume, I think that to drive across North Carolina from the beach to get to Tennessee, it would be between 6 and 7 hours, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're driving that far, you
Maybe even
making a
7 to
day of
8
it.
hours.
Yeah. So there are some pretty good accounts of this in the Charlotte Observer and the Citizen Times. If you're that Citizen Times is an Asheville newspaper. If you're looking to read up on the trial itself, they cover it kind of in detail. I will admit that, like, when I got to this point in the story, I thought to myself, okay, well, we've got something happening here. The prosecutors they've charged Helms, but not Harmon. The public defenders that are representing Hyatt, they go after the fact that they're charged, and he claims that the witnesses are less than reliable. And they do point out in this case, because of the condition of the bodies, there's no reliable physical evidence. But the prosecutors acknowledge this, and they point out that, like, there's no real motive for Harmon to have confessed and to have dragged Helms into this story with Hyatt. And Hyatt ends up on February 1st of 2000 being found guilty of both of these murders. And keep in mind, at the time, these would have been death penalty eligible murders.
We have no idea how Helms and Harmon. We don't know why Jerry Harmon would have known to say, hey, you also need to go talk to Helms.
Yeah, we don't know that yet.
Okay.
And it doesn't come up. I don't think it's in the appellate document. I don't think we get to that point where we understand how this is all related to these guys.
And personally, I would feel, so this is my understanding of what happened. You've got Jerry Harmon expressing what I would consider to be like consciousness of guilt, right?
Correct, yes.
He feels guilty that this has occurred, and he's turning in himself basically, and then to a greater extent, his friend Terry Hyatt.
Right.
And to bolster his credibility, he was like, you guys also need to go talk to Lester Helms, right?
Yeah.
And to me, all of that sounds sketchy because, like, I don't know the circumstances, but it seems really odd that, because keep in mind, Jerry Harmon wasn't with Helms and Hyatt.
Right.
Okay. And then Helms wasn't with Harmon and Hyatt.
Right.
Okay. And so what? Do they sit around and talk about this?
Well, it doesn't really come up here.
Well, I know, but like how would they know? So my immediate thought, now there's a conviction and everything in this. This has gone through the whole process. But my immediate thought was, that seems very convenient, right? And
it does.
And there's some other things that come up here in a little bit, but I just wanted to point that out. So when you've got a situation where, like, not only am I turning in a crime that my friend committed while I was with him, you need to talk to this other friend who was with Hyatt when he committed a different crime.
Right. And okay. I'm wondering if they didn't get drunk one night and, like, they were just talking and the two of them compared notes on how creepy Hyatt was.
That makes me wonder, like, you're right, except I'm just not sure. But anyway, go ahead.
I'm with you because, like I said, I had doubts when I'm reading the recount of the trial. I had doubts about it.
Well, one of the things we were talking about, we haven't really gotten to it yet, but there's some corroboration to the fact that there's two guys involved.
Correct.
In these different situations. And, there can be two guys involved.
I had wondered if these guys were somehow the dudes from the other case.
Well,
and had confessed, but it's not them. They're separate of it. And okay, let me get to a couple of things here.
Oh, you mean the case we were talking about earlier?
Yeah. The double homicide case. Sorry. So one of the things that pops up in this appeal is they make an argument about his rights under Miranda v. Arizona being violated. So basically, we've talked about this on the show before, but the appellate lawyers are arguing that North Carolina law enforcement officers denied him assistance of counsel during a custodial interrogation, and that they had deceived him during the course of the interrogation. For the record, cops can always lie until somebody rules otherwise. The lawyers further contend that the state court clearly violated established federal law by failing to suppress incriminating statements that he had made. So we're going to swing back around to those. This is how they're trying to get this case to be heard by the 4th District. Hyatt's argument rests on the fact that during his initial interrogation by law enforcement officers, his rights are violated. On November 19th of 1998, Tim Shook, that's a special agent we've talked about before, with the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, and a detective named Ann Benjamin, who is a detective with the Buncombe County Sheriff's Department. They go to Terry Hyatt's home to talk to him. They tell Hyatt that they're investigating a murder that had occurred earlier that year, and Hyatt offered to provide a DNA sample to clear his name. You see what they did there?
Yeah.
He knows he didn't kill anybody in 1998. So he voluntarily drives his truck down to the Buncombe County Public Health Department, and he gets his blood drawn by consent. After he gives the blood sample, he and the officers drive over to the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office. When he gets into the interview room, Special Agent Shook explains that the officers are actually investigating the abduction, rape, and murder of Betty Sue McConnell. The officers tell Hyatt that they found fingerprint evidence that connects him to the scene of the crime. They do not have fingerprint evidence. They just tell him this. They say that Hyatt's demeanor changed and he became silent. At this point in time, Agent Shook reads Hyatt his Miranda rights, and Hyatt signs an acknowledgement to this effect. Hyatt agrees that he's going to talk to these two officers, but he asks if he can call his dad first. So the officers handcuff him. Agent Shook, Detective Benjamin, and the captain of the Buncombe County Sheriff's Department at the time, a guy named Pat Hefner, they put him in the car and they drive out to Terry Hyatt's dad's house. He's handcuffed the entire visit, but he's also been Mirandized. Hyatt and his father go out on the back porch and they speak. Hyatt tells his father that he's in trouble for something that has occurred a long time ago. According to his statement, Hyatt's father says that Hyatt told him, "I want you to get me a lawyer." Although Hyatt and his father were whispering, Hyatt's father testified that Agent Shook, who was only 10 or 12 feet away, was close enough to hear their conversation and what they were saying, including Hyatt's request for a lawyer. Agent Shook acknowledges that he could hear most everything, but he testifies he did not hear Terry Hyatt ask for counsel. He says that he did recall that Hyatt's father instructed Terry Hyatt to get a lawyer. Detective Benjamin was a few feet further away, and she testified she did not hear much of the discussion. And Captain Pat Hefner, he stayed in the front yard. So Hyatt and his father, they walk around to the front porch. Hyatt's girlfriend, a woman named Sydney Spaulding, is there. Shook and Benjamin follow Hyatt around to the front. Spaulding says that at that time, Hyatt asked his father to find him an attorney. Again, Agent Shook says he did not hear Hyatt request counsel. And once again, the other two, Benjamin and Hefner, are too far away to have heard the conversation. So then they pile back into their cars, and Hyatt returns to the sheriff's department with the officers. He's still in handcuffs. And once in the interrogation room, Hyatt stated that his daddy wanted him to call a lawyer. And Ann Benjamin says, "You're 41 years old. You need to decide for yourself if you need a lawyer." But according to Shook, and according to Detective Benjamin, they testify, Hyatt never says, I want a lawyer. During the interrogation that follows, because they continue to interview him, Hyatt makes a series of incriminating statements. He stated that he was guilty of robbing someone, but he denied having killed anyone. Nonetheless, he asked what would happen to him if he did admit to killing Mrs. McConnell. He then acknowledged that he was present when Mrs. McConnell was murdered, but contended that Jerry Harmon, had raped and killed her. After Agent Shook asked him about the murder of Miss Simmons, Terry Hyatt ended the interview. So what happens at this point when you've gone that far and you've given this many statements, which Meg and I have told everyone, and we would have also told Terry Hyatt if he asked, don't talk to the cops. But he has. He's already talked to them, and he's given them just enough information to arrest them.
Right, but I mean, he was under arrest before he was taken to see his father.
Yeah.
And he acknowledged a waiver of his rights. This is touchy for me because
it's complex.
It is complex. I feel like in the spirit of so there's two things. I feel like in the spirit of like what being Mirandized means and like your Fifth Amendment right to not incriminate yourself, I think that was satisfied to an extent here as far as him making comments about my daddy thinks I need to get a lawyer. But ultimately, Hyatt, it said in at least the court opinion that Hyatt terminated the interview when they brought up Miss Simmons.
Yes.
And so if that's to be believed, he had the ability to terminate the interview at any time.
And he did.
He did, right. And so, but my point is, if he had really wanted an attorney and they weren't allowing him to have one, he could have terminated the interview at that point.
Well, this is what I'll say. A defendant who knows they've committed multiple homicides, who is sitting in a police interrogation room, asking for their dad, is terrified. And they should be. Because they know they committed multiple homicides.
Why would that scare them, though?
Because they're about to be put in jail, and they know it.
I guess my brain just won't ever register like why that would be scary when you've killed people.
Well, you killed women, and now, a woman and a man are interviewing you about these women that you've killed.
It just seems to me like if that's the route you want to go, just own it. And
yeah, you may as well.
It just seems like weird. Like you're such a tough guy. Why do you turn into a fraidy cat because the law got involved?
Yeah.
It's weird, right?
Yeah. So after he leaves his father's house, there's a conversation between Hyatt's father and Hyatt's brother. And they talk about like the fact that he's in handcuffs and going with the cops. The brother calls a local attorney named Sean Devereaux. He asks him to go in and represent Hyatt. Hyatt's father and his brother tell Devereaux that Hyatt had requested the assistance of an attorney. Devereaux calls the sheriff's department. He states he represents Hyatt, and he asks the officers to terminate the interrogation. But the officers at the sheriff's department refused, and they stated that Hyatt has not invoked his right to counsel. And then there's a little bit of back and forth when Devereaux shows up explaining that he represents Hyatt, attempting to speak with him. They refuse the request. And this is not just from the law enforcement officers at the sheriff's department, and there's some SBI there at this point, but also from the assistant district attorneys for Buncombe County. They're in the room, and they're in the next room, and they refuse Devereaux's request. During the interrogation, the officers do not inform Hyatt that Devereaux has arrived and claimed to represent him. He's now terminated this interrogation, and at that point in time, they do permit Devereaux to see him. Devereaux then witnessed the conversation where Hyatt reportedly asked Detective Benjamin, "Why did you lie to me about a lawyer? You know that I asked for one." And Detective Benjamin replies, "No, you didn't, Terry. You asked to speak to your father. You never asked for a lawyer." And I felt like that was it. If he was going to get like a good appeal out of this, it was going to be that.
Right. But I maintain though, and it's so tricky because you can feel a sense of like overwhelming dread that would cause you to not want to be like super firm with the police because they have all the power in this situation, right?
Yeah.
But still, like, it's not just a matter of asking for an attorney. You ask for an attorney and then you just say, I'm exercising my right to remain silent. You don't engage in the conversation.
Right.
And you're allowed to do that no matter what they threaten you with or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But I think that this is rather dicey, especially the way that the court ends up deciding it.
Yeah, and there, like, the right to counsel is literally the only leg that Hyatt has to stand on. There are a number of other things that happen in court, and he is appointed counsel because, to be honest with you, when you're looking at a double homicide case like this, it's expensive. It's so expensive. People don't understand how expensive it is. You're better off using capital defenders in most jurisdictions, which are the people who regularly interact on homicide cases, as opposed to the very few lawyers who regularly, try a homicide case. But the bottom line is, even when he's in court, he doesn't really ask for his counsel to be substituted. The family says they will hire another set of attorneys. Ultimately, the finding here is none of that really helps him. Would you agree that's a good summary of it all?
I think so.
One of the things that I want to point out here that I said I had questions, it's going to be a while before those questions get wrapped up. On February 1st, 2000, obviously we're talking about an appellate case. Hyatt is found guilty and convicted of McConnell and Simmons murders. The family celebrates this verdict. He is handed 2 death sentences for the murder charges and 6 consecutive life sentences for counts of rape, kidnapping, and robbery. It's going to be 5 years before this gets cleared up in a way that I can look at it and go, okay, that probably makes sense. And I don't know if this did it for you, but it did it for me. Hyatt's DNA finds its way into CODIS. And you and I wonder about this all the time. There is a match made when investigators take the cold case of Jerry Jones and run a cigarette butt into CODIS. That matches with Terry Hyatt. It matches Hyatt's semen. The cigarette butt and Hyatt's semen are found at the scene of her crime, including semen that is found in her mouth. And at that point in time, Hyatt has figured out that he does not have a leg to stand on. He's been in prison for 5 years. So he makes a plea deal with the prosecutors, who agree not to seek the death penalty if he will plead guilty to Jerry Jones' murder. And he gets yet another life imprisonment to run consecutively with his other sentences. So after he is dead and his sentence is served for all the ones we just talked about, he now has to serve life in prison as well. But yet, this plus is still sitting here. So that's 3. We have Jerry Jones. We have Betty McConnell. We have Harriet Simmons. And he still has this little plus by his name. Have you seen anything where he might have committed other crimes when he's not in prison?
No.
I haven't either. And I wonder why this plus is here. Because I can't find anything.
Well, you have to presume that Betty Sue McConnell happened in 79. Harriet Delaney Simmons happened in 79. He does his stint for kidnapping.
We don't know his exact release date from actual prison. We just know he was back out in the world for 1987.
But that happened in 1979. And so he goes into prison for that. And then Jerry Jones's murder is in 1987. And that's the only one that has DNA linking him to it.
Yes.
Okay. And so there's no indication that they ever even attempted to link his DNA to Harriet Simmons or Betty McConnell, right?
Correct.
And so the time period that passes while he's in jail for the crime against Carolyn Brigman, something changed, right?
Yeah. This is the attempted, yeah.
Because suddenly there were things to test DNA on later, right?
Correct.
And so there's some leeway there as far as crimes that occurred that, now granted, he was put in jail fairly quickly.
Yeah.
After Carolyn Brigman. And so anything before Harriet Simmons, I don't think in this area at this time that they would have been retaining samples with the idea that maybe one day there'll be something to do with them.
Right.
Okay. And he couldn't have done anything until when I'm going to imagine he gets out right around 87.
Yeah,
sometime.
I would agree with that.
Okay. I'm not really sure. It's weird that that's not more of a record. Because when I first looked at it, it didn't seem possible that he could have done that murder. Except that his DNA was found there, right?
Yeah.
So he had to have been out at some point before then. Anyway, this is a little bit concerning to me, especially since maybe you can help me understand. How long did he go? So he gets out for his kidnapping charge. He kills Jerry Jones, but he's not arrested again until in 98, right?
Correct.
Okay. And so anything that happened in between 87 and 98, unless it was in a place that wasn't maintaining samples for possible DNA testing, it should have shown up, right?
Yeah, it should have. I mean, he should have popped in CODIS unless the way that this would have to work is I think you would have to, because he's so young, he's 22 years old when he commits his first murder. You would have to get a firm timeline on him, figure out when he's in the halfway house and when he's like on probation and out in the world and when they terminate that. Because that was the other weird thing is technically his probation expires, but like I can't even pull that date. So if I could find that, I could give you a timeline and say, look, if you look at him from the first time he's arrested and when he goes to prison, and he had done some jail time here and there, but it wasn't very long. I think the longest sentence he'd had before this was 18 months, give or take. But you could map it out and you could look for missing persons because that might be the reason, even beyond the DNA collection, that's the second problem that you have. But if you looked in North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, the areas, particularly in the mountain areas, you could potentially find unsolved homicides to run evidence on or unsolved missing persons cases that seem to fit his MO of a female gone missing in a fairly vulnerable position, either walking, hitchhiking, potentially with a disabled vehicle of some kind.
Especially if they were near a donut shop.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned that earlier. The Krispy Kreme and the Dunkin' Donut things that was weird, right?
It's very weird.
And then you've got the Harris Teeter, the grocery store. I don't know. I brought him up. I don't have a lot more on him right now. He's one of those that like I will now have a reason to look for the plus symbol. That's not a part of the episode today. I just wanted to lay out kind of the facts of the case and have an episode about him because we had mentioned him in a previous episode, and I realized like he pops up in some true crime media, but not everybody knows who he is. And he is a serial killer. Like, you know, he has 3 homicides he's convicted for. And if he did all 3 of them, I don't think they'd have a reason to go back and look at Simmons and McConnell for DNA at the scene because he's been convicted.
Right, but so does that conviction bother you at all?
You know, if it weren't for Jerry Jones, I would dig really deep into this. But because his semen is found at the scene of Jerry Jones, and there are similarities to how she's killed to the other two women, I don't feel as bothered.
I was trying to find, I wanted to see what Harmon.
There is, I did go back through the state appeals in this case if people want to go hunting them. State versus Hyatt versus Brinker is one of them, and State versus Hyatt. So that Hyatt versus Brinker is the federal appeal. State versus Hyatt, there are two separate appeals you can read about. There was an indication that there was sperm found in McConnell, the woman who died on the way to the hospital. They did do a kit on her because I had wondered that, and I wanted to clarify that as we kind of wrap this up. I don't think it was possible to do anything on Simmons because of the time and the decomposition.
Right. Well, right. Yeah. I'm not really sure of all the ins and outs, but I think maybe it's not odd to me that they didn't have samples from the crime scene to do DNA testing on from, 1979. That I didn't find that to be odd. What I do find to be odd is a situation where Jerry Leon Harmon does not appear to have been imprisoned for anything to do with this crime.
Correct. Lester Helms was. Leon Harmon was not.
It seems kind of odd, right?
A little bit, yeah.
It doesn't look like Lester Helms was either.
Lester Helms was.
Does he have a different name? I have him 1981 assault with a deadly weapon. And
or maybe he's not then.
1982 is it says other
felony. Yeah, I guess I am wrong on that.
As recently as 23, you've got Harmon being arrested for trafficking cocaine. Well, here's my point. My point is, I'm not so sure that he wasn't set up by his friends for the other ones. I mean,
gets out and thinks like I'm going to do it, but he's got the attempted as well.
No, I think that he did that one, and then I think his friends really felt guilty, and I think that the two of them were the ones that were involved in those, and that they, in turn, decided to blame it on him.
Okay, well, I would buy that. So that means
he really just
committed the one attempted and then the one murder.
It just seems really odd they didn't get charged with anything.
Oh, I'm with you, man. I have all kinds of questions about this. Otherwise, I wouldn't bring it up. There's just not a way to dig into this.
I think the plus is open-ended on purpose because he was so young. Well, because he was young when he supposedly when he the first two crimes he was. No, I'm sorry. He had the attempted kidnapping first, and then after 1998, when Harmon comes forward, he is then convicted, and he hasn't been out of prison since then, right? The reason that Jerry Jones was discovered was because of DNA from the scene matching his CODIS entry.
Correct.
And so he's on death row.
He is, yes.
Okay. And before the first two crimes that he was convicted of committing, like he was only 22 at that time. So we're probably not looking at a whole bunch before then, right?
Right.
And then he's got a period of time where he's incarcerated for the attempted. And they linked him to the statement of the victim, right? She was able, because it was just the attempted kidnapping. She identified him, right?
Yeah.
I presume. I mean, I assume she knew what she was talking about, right?
Correct, yes. And he was convicted and all of the things that come with that, yeah.
If you go back just briefly to Betty McConnell was alive when she was initially found, and she had the opportunity to say, according to the court opinion, she said, I was picked up at work by two guys, stabbed and thrown into the river.
Yes.
right? And that's about as far as that got. And up until the point when Harmon came in and was talking about it, there was nothing more to that case, right?
Right.
I just would be interested to know what the connection between Harmon and Helms is and why they were let go scot-free. It's very clear from Betty McConnell's statement that there were two guys involved.
Well, so that's how Helms and Harmon, for me, I was like, I wonder if they had anything to do with this double homicide that we've been talking about. Like, were they the people? But I couldn't find anything linking them.
Well, right, and they're not so they have been arrested. They just weren't arrested for this, and there's no indication that they'd be, quote, Native American, end quote.
Correct.
Remember the DNA or whatever they were talking about from the other case? There was some Native lineage there, and I don't think these guys would fit that.
No, I don't think so either.
I do, however, think that two different crimes having been committed with one of each of them involved with supposedly Terry Hyatt. Essentially, Terry Hyatt went to jail for both of the crimes, and his two accomplices both got away with it. And so in the event that the stories were concocted, that would have been a successful plan that they had. Because
you're right, yeah.
They literally got their buddy arrested for crimes the two of them committed, and they got away with it. I don't know if that's the case. I just find it very odd that they weren't charged at all. And I would say up to a certain point, they never would have been. I also would say that Terry Hyatt was going to be found more than likely because I don't know when he was entered into CODIS, but Jerry Jones's DNA match is unequivocal, right?
In my opinion, it is, yeah.
I thought that I had to go back and look. I thought that there was a chance that they had matched him to something else with one of the other cases.
I thought it was McConnell. For some reason, I thought there was available DNA evidence in McConnell's case because she was alive when they found her.
No, but not that I'm aware of. Not that comes up as evidence in the trial or in. I'm trying to think now. He went through trial on this, right? Or no?
Yes. Oh, McConnell? Yes.
McConnell and
Simmons. Yeah.
Simmons, yeah. And then supposedly he made incriminating statements. We don't know what they were necessarily, but this was heavily skewed under the circumstances that, because it's in the opinion and I haven't seen it anywhere else to say differently, that Harmon just stumbles into the sheriff's office one day. And, I've said previously, you've always got to wonder about the person talking, right?
And?
Well, the person talking is usually downplaying their role in things, and it's just an odd situation.
I 100% agree with that statement, by the way. I'm not disagreeing. I thought you had more to say there.
Perhaps there was something credible about the situation. Perhaps there's more to it than what's presented in the documentation we can find, because this was a long time ago, even like from 1998, right?
Yeah.
I think it is a stretch to put him off as to indicate he's like some sort of notorious serial killer. I mean, obviously, if this is all true and his convictions are correct, I would say that that he is, by the definition, a serial killer, right? He's not a great dude. But at the same time, I would say that it is exceedingly odd to have two accomplices that in consciousness of guilt confess to being with you at crimes. And you have to keep in mind, there wasn't anything that independently verified his involvement, right?
His semen was found on Jerry Jones.
Harmon and
Harmon and Helms. They're all H's. It's crazy, right?
Harmon and Helms did not implicate him and Jerry Jones.
Correct.
That's what I'm getting at. I understand that he is 100% responsible for Jerry Jones's murder. It's DNA corroborated. My issue is it's a little bit odd that, and I'm not saying it had to be DNA link, but like it's 1998, so what is that, 19 years? 19 years after the murders, and the only thing that links him to the crime is his, well, I guess they weren't even his accomplices because they weren't charged.
The people that were with him on the night of the incidents that's what.
I don't feel like that should have been enough. Not that I don't want him. I want these murders solved. It's just very odd. Under the circumstances that I've looked into cases, I also don't get the impression that Helms and Harmon were really smart enough to pull something like this off.
I didn't get that impression either. What
I mean by pulling it off is that, if they were the ones involved and Hyatt wasn't. Because, their friend was already convicted at one point for something, right? That's what I'm thinking they were thinking.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. So here's what I did. I don't know if you have a lot more on this. I'll talk about it more. I reached out to Terry Hyatt to see if he would talk to us.
What did he say?
I don't know. He accepted my message.
Oh, good. Well, we'll hear it from him then. I would be interested to do that. He's sitting on death row in North Carolina.
Yep.
And he doesn't have a death date or anything, right?
Nothing. Nope.
But his death sentences stem from the
two questionable homicides.
The two homicides that his friends implicated, or I don't know if they're friends. I don't know what you call them. The people,
the drunk people.
Helms and Harmon implicated him in. Okay, and my thought on it is it's really odd that happened. It's really odd. And the other thing was, did he stumble in, or was he drunk and was he arrested?
It says that he came in. I don't know about that. I didn't see an arrest for that night.
Hold on. Do we know what the day was?
Yeah, it was August 13th, 1998. Jerry Harmon visited the sheriff's department, according to the court record.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabrottieCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS.
You fall like the stars. I break things like guitars. Thick skin, no scars. We're in trouble, we took it too far. I don't want to go, but it's 'cause I'll disappoint ya. It's all I've ever dreamed of, something I cannot let go of. I hate the competition, this culture's like a gym, and I lost the motivation to get fit in your expectations.
True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through Patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at TrueCrimeAccess.com. Thank you for joining us.